Ted Wright here from Epic Archaeology, and we are, again, welcome to our podcast. I'm trying to get everything started here because I've got a lot of people trying to get in, and we have people watching live through Facebook. So if you are signed into the link, I'll try to get to you as soon as I can. But we're going to go ahead and dive in. Obviously, you're here watching this for a reason, and it was because of the announcement of a really remarkable discovery that was made really a few years ago, Scott, and you'll get into that in a minute. But the publicity for this discovery was just a week or so ago in Houston, Texas, at the Lanier Theological Library. And I'm speaking today with Dr. Scott Stripling, who is an archaeologist and also a professor and a provost for the Bible Seminary. And Scott, I want to go ahead and welcome you to this sort of a live event today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Ted. I'm looking forward to it.
It's great to have you. And could you maybe tell the listeners a little bit about kind of what you do, what your role is, and what you've been doing in the past 25, I guess you've been in archaeology really for about 25 years or so, right?
Right. I was a pastor early in my career, had a master's in English and then a seminary degree also, so a second master's, and then did graduate studies and ultimately a PhD in ancient Near Eastern archaeology. So my fascination with the background of the biblical text is what led me into archaeology, got involved as a volunteer and sort of worked my way up through the ranks. And, you know, one thing led to another, and I've had the privilege of excavating at a number of sites in the highlands of Israel in particular. So it's been a real joy. I currently serve as the provost at the Bible Seminary and the director of our Archaeological Institute here, where we have a Master of Arts in Biblical History and Archaeology. And then I'm the director of excavations for the Associates for Biblical Research, currently working at Ancient Shiloh. We did a side project at Mt Ebal that has turned into more than we bargained for.
And I first met you in 2014 at the site where you were directing the excavation at Kirbet El Makader, which is in the West Bank. And you were there, I think that was in 2014, which is about the, 13th or 14th year of excavation at Kirbet El Makader?
Yes,
that somewhere about right. I think because Dr. Bryant Wood and Gary Byers, I understand, is the guys who really got that started.
Yep.
So we are again excited to have you to be with us today to discuss this. First of all, this is going to be a kind of sort of a conversational interview with Dr. Stripling, and let's just start at the very beginning and tell the listeners and the viewers out there what exactly it is, just so we'll know what we're talking about. What exactly was it that your team discovered on Mount Ebal?
All right, I'll give you the short version.
Okay.
From 82 to 89, Professor Adam Zertal from Haifa University excavated a structure on Mount Ebal at a site called El Bornat on the second step on the east side, which he came to believe was an altar. In fact, ultimately came to believe that the larger rectangular altar was actually Joshua's altar. There was a smaller round altar at the perfect geometric center of this rectangular altar. The excavation of this altar caused Zertal, who was an agnostic, he grew up on a kibbutz and they were communists essentially, caused him to become a believer in the historicity of the Bible. And this was a huge crisis back in the 1980s among those on the left, because what are we going to do with Adam? You know, he's gone off the reservation, so to speak. But Zertal, I think, was vindicated when we, in December of 2019, using our West Spring technology that we have perfected, we went back through his dump piles, or at least about 30% of his dump piles, where archaeologists discard material, you know, after they've examined it. And based on my prior experience, we knew that there was going to be a lot in it. And there were other old dump piles that I was going back through as part of a project that I wanted to publish and say, hey guys, my colleagues in archaeology, we need to stop doing things the way we're doing them. Look what's in the trash, you know, and here's a better way to do it. And so I was not surprised that we found important things in Zertal's dump, but overall his dump was cleaner than other dumps that I examined. So he was quite thorough, but without... Go ahead.
So just to interrupt here for just a second, for those non-archaeologists, you're talking about dumps here. This is the debris that is taken out of an excavation of another, like you're evaluating this material, and then that material is taken out, and then some of it's actually dry sifted and some of it's sifted through, but then whatever gets left behind, would that be the proper way to describe a dump?
Yes, and they dry sifted everything after season one, which is just removing the mantle of stones. Then they dry sifted everything. We went back and dry sifted it a second time because we had to get rid of all the soil. And then we took the matrix that was left. So he missed this tablet we're going to talk about. They missed it in dry sifting. We missed it in dry sifting. Okay, so it's just a little, looks like a stone chip when it's covered with dirt. It was only when we washed the matrix that it popped and we were able to see what it was.
Oh, wow. So you took the material that Adam Zertal had taken from this altar site on Mount Ebal, and they had dry sifted it. You guys had dry sifted it, and then you went through and wet sifted it. And could you describe for the listeners what's the benefit of wet sifting a matrix of soil versus dry sifting? What kind of things do you find with wet sifting?
Well, you'll find a lot more when you wet sift, because when you have small objects like bula or scarabs or little, lead tablets, if they're covered in dirt, they look just like little stones, little chips.
Right.
And you're looking at thousands of them each day when you're sifting, and they're just passed over. And in fact, it's very difficult for a volunteer in an archaeological square or sift to spot things like that.
Right.
So it's when we wash it that then we can see much, much more. Try walking at an archaeological site. You may have done this right after a rain. So you're going to see things right after the rain that you never see before, because now the colors are popping.
Right. Now, is there a precedent for wet sifting? Are there any other, and I know the answer to this, and I know you do as well, but for the listeners, are there any other major archaeological sites or digs currently going on in Israel today, or maybe in other parts of the world, that are using wet sifting as a process?
The answer might surprise you a little bit. James Starkey at Lachish in the 1930s, who was a brilliant archaeologist.
Oh, wow.
Got your attention, huh?
Yeah.
Starkey was actually wet sifting in the 1930s.
Wow.
And there's pictures of him with local residents, and it's very primitive, but they're wet sifting. And he recognized the value, and he was so brilliant, and unfortunately had a very untimely death. And his colleagues and his team, they dumped the methodology. They thought this takes much time and it's too expensive. Well, yes, it does take time and money. Those are the objections that I hear right now from people who don't want to do it. But what's the rush? I mean, as an archaeologist, we get one bite at the apple. We cannot replicate this experiment. So I'm trying to get everybody to slow down, and we'll teach you how to do it. We'll show you how to build the stations, I just think it's that important to the field. Anyway, Starkey's team forgot about it, and the institutional memory was lost. And it wasn't until 17 years ago when Gabi Barkai's team began to work with the Temple Mount Sifting Project with that debris from the southeast corner. I worked for 2 years as a supervisor on that project. That's when I became a believer in wet sifting. And I made up my mind that when I had the chance, like when I'm in charge one of these days, we're going to do this in situ in the field. And so at Shiloh, we have perfected the art of literally, as we excavate, we are washing everything so we know exactly where it came from. Then I just extended that to the Mt Ebal project, and we built a provisional wet sifting station, and this is what we got.
That's fantastic. So to go back to the Temple Mount Sifting Project, you mentioned Gabi Barkai, and just because this is going to lead to another question about your discovery on Mount Ebal, has Gabi's team discovered things that were pretty remarkable in the Temple Mount? What are some of a couple of objects that maybe even when they came to light, sort of caused a sort of ripple effect in the archaeological community, and were they accepted by the wider community, or were they rejected because they came out of the fact that they came out of a dump type site?
Okay, well, some of the finds from the TMSP and there have been thousands of small finds. I used to take my teams there to train them before the dig started so they could sharpen their eyes on finding these, small finds. But yeah, there are inscriptions, coins, opus sectile paving tiles. We knew nothing about the paving of the Second Temple until the Temple Mount Sifting project, basically due to Frankie Snyder's work there. Were able to identify and crack the code, the geometric code on what the paving was like in the Second Temple. That in and of itself is huge,
Yeah.
So sometimes, like in antiquity, there was part of an inscription that was found in situ, and now through wet sifting, we find the other part of it. We can match it. Now we've completed the inscription. So it didn't matter that it was out of context. We know that the two pieces fit together, for example.
Right.
And we found the same thing at Shiloh, incidentally. The Danish had found a hunting scene that was rolled, like a cylinder seal rolled on the outside of a storage jar. They had part of the scene in their dump. We found the rest of it. So it didn't matter that we didn't find it in situ. We were able to complete the inscription.
Is this process, this wet sifting process, how is it received? Not just what you're doing, but also what Gabby's doing there. Is it just because it's sort of a pain to do, or is it sort of as a methodology? Is it sort of widely accepted by the wider archaeological community in Israel, or is it sort of a if that makes sense?
It has to be. And that was my motivation all along. You will occasionally hear somebody say, like, well, as an archaeologist, I have many methodologies in my toolbox and I employ which one I think is best at the time. That's a bunch of hooey, okay? That's a bunch. Now, if you don't have water, okay, so you could be at a site like Kerbet El Makadar, we had no water, okay,
right,
or bathrooms or anything else as far as that
exactly.
And you're in a salvage operation, that's one thing. But even then, looking back, I wish I would have had water trucks each day that would have come. It's that important. But we do have a number of digs that are now starting to use this. The Mount Zion dig, Shimon Gibson's dig, they are some of their like critical loci, they're wet sifting and they're finding phenomenal things. They're sold on it. I taught the University of Haifa team how to do this, and they now have a wet sifting station, a portable wet sifting station. The City of David work on the Ophel. They have been using this for a while, but contracting with the Temple Mount Sifting Project. So when they have critical loci, they dry sift it, then they send the matrix over to be sifted. And some of those finds, we do know where it's coming, and that's where you get, like at the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, you've got a ritual purity token. You've got a menorah, an inscribed menorah, and some evidences like that
Correct.
I quoted in my recent article. So yeah, it's very valuable.
That's great. That is awesome. And the reason why I even asked the question is one of the criticisms that I'm sure you've read a lot of people who have been sort of critical of this discovery and maybe how you guys have, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the whole idea about, was the methodology, and it is it's a widely accepted methodology that's practiced in Israel and in Jordan and other sites in the ancient Near East. So it's not like you guys are just sort of like rushing to find, you're using a very well-known methodology that's accepted by other archaeologists in the field, even people who are not necessarily, we can say, conservative Christians. These are Israeli archaeologists who have various religious backgrounds who are using this methodology.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be silly for anyone to argue that the methodology doesn't work. Come with me to Shiloh and let's take a dump pile from the 1930s from the Danish, and let's go through that and let's look at what they published in their final report and then what we find in their dump pile. For every one scarab that they published, I've got 4 out of their dump.
That's awesome. That is really cool.
I've got 80% more than they got. That's out of their dump.
That's amazing. That's so cool. So, okay, let me get to a little bit of a not a controversial issue, but just because I want you to address this for people, because some of my friends that I've talked to, they've asked me, and I was like, well, I'll ask Scott when I interview him. And again, it's not to try to paint you into a corner. I just want to, get your thinking on this. What was the motivation to go public with this? Like, why go public with this before it was, published in like a peer-reviewed journal? And again, I'm just to know the thinking on it.
Sure. No, I'm happy to respond to that.
Sure.
There were several reasons. One, there were some misconceptions that were already out there. I was contacted by a reporter asking me, is it true that there's the name of one of the prophets is on this? Where does that come from? I have no idea. that there was a lily on the outside of this, and just a bunch of misinformation. Number two, there was a concern about academic piracy. And what happens is when your research gets stolen, because if anybody listening doesn't know that their emails can be hacked, and quite frankly, in this collaboration, we're dealing with I've got 7 people on 3 continents. In this collaboration, this is all flying by email, you know, and we were concerned, quite frankly, because of the seriousness of this inscription, that it could be hacked and then we could be shut out from our own research, essentially. So we wanted to kind of set that monocle out there. And then finally, the import was enormous. We wanted to give part of what was there. All we talked about was what's on the inside of the tablet. We haven't discussed yet what's on the outside, okay? And to establish that it is our research, here's what we're doing, here's our methodology, here's where we're going. And quite frankly, there's been a lot of lame criticism, but there's been some good points too that I'm going, oh, okay, yeah. When we complete the article, you know, we'll make sure that that's something that gets addressed. So it gave us a little bit of halfway feed point. Overall, there's really not that much. You've got, of course, very predictably from the left, you know, Israel Finkelstein said this and Chris Rolston said that, but besides that, there's only a handful of people that are out there. I think skepticism is a good thing. I mean, I'm not against that at all. And people who know me, of course, are going to be less skeptical because they know that I'm not ready to risk my reputation on, you know, something like this. But those who don't or haven't been associated with me, I can understand skepticism.
Absolutely. And so this is this tablet that you guys discovered is a lead tablet. So to go back to the artifact again, and what makes it really perhaps, and get this from your own words, from what I understand of it, what really makes it sort of controversial, if you will, is for what it actually might imply. So I want to unpack that a little bit. Before we do that, though, to sort of give some biblical context, this is Mount Ebal where you guys discovered it, and this is in ancient Samaria, which has got a lot of history in Old Testament history as well as New Testament history as well. You got Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, the mountain of curses and the mountain of blessing, and then right in the middle of that, you got Shechem, the ancient site of Shechem, or Tel Balata, which is where Jesus spoke to the woman at the well. It's the ancient ancestral home of Jacob and the patriarchs, and so it's a very rich area archaeologically. And so just to clarify, Scott, on Mount Ebal, Adam Zertal, just to review, found a altar site literally under another altar site. And Zertal's altar site, what you're saying is that it actually dates the time of Joshua's. Would that be a correct way to look at that?
Yes, but let me nuance it a little bit.
Sure.
Zertal thought there were two phases. So he had a stratum 1 and a stratum 2. Someone was asking me, well, you know, how could you date this? It was out of context. Hello, there's only 2 choices. There's like 2 and there's iron 1. Those were his 2 stratum. When people say stuff like that, like apparently you're not aware of the excavation report. There's only 2 choices. And whichever one it is, it's much older than any previous writing that we have. Anyway, what was your question? I sidetracked myself.
So this is so I'm just trying to put it in the context of Old Testament history and why this what it actually says. It's a curses tablet, and it was found on a site where they actually built an altar, where Joshua built an altar. And
okay,
so
I remember your question now. So the altars, you have the round altar, which Zertal, 2 by 2 meter, he dated that to about 1250 BC. Okay, LB2B.
Okay.
And then he thought the site was in use for about 100 years until about 1150, which would be into Iron Age 1. And then it was intentionally covered with a mantle or a blanket of stones and taken out of practice, if you will. Now, it's my view, and I wrote about this in 5 Views on the Exodus, and since then our pottery analysis has suggested this more strongly, that what Zertal dated to LB2B should be LB2A. And there are some forms that are no longer in existence by that time that he had there. You know, they're no longer being used in LB2B, but yet they're present at the site. Now, only 3% of the pottery is late Bronze Age and 97% is Iron Age, because the Bible doesn't even imply that this was more than a one-time ceremony.
Right.
Okay. Not to say that people didn't come back and visit the site, but that it was continual usage, that's clearly a little bit later. So I would think that it's maybe that LB1B, LB2A horizon around 1400 BC that we have the primogenial altar constructed. And then later in the period of the judges, they come along and they venerate that by building this large rectangular altar on top of it.
Ah, got it. And so in this altar site is where in the matrix of Zertal's excavation of the altars, where you actually discovered the tablet. And so it's what we call a defixio. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, to fix a defixio. That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So for the listeners, could you explain exactly what that is?
All right, it's a curse tablet, and as soon as I saw it, I knew what it was. It was found in Frankie Snyder's tray, and Frankie was our small finds expert. So providentially, she saw it. She knew what it was. Once you know what it is, you don't have to be told what it is. And then she called me over. I immediately knew what it was. Abigail was there. So all three of us immediately, we started dancing. Like, you got to be kidding me. We have a curse tablet. If someone was playing a joke on me, I would have killed them at that point. Here we knew that it was a curse tablet. It was a defixio from Mt Ebal, from the altar. And I thought, I'll tell you what I told him right on the spot, Ted. I said, okay, guys, don't get too excited, because these are better known from the early Roman and the late Hellenistic period. And it could have been that a later pilgrim came along knowing this was Joshua's altar and left something there. And even so, that would be huge if they did.
Sure, yeah.
Recognition. But I said, these are more common from the later period. Just everybody be cool, calm down. I was as shocked as the next person when we began to see letters emerge through the tomographic scans, and they were proto-alphabetic. Ted, it was older than Paleo Hebrew.
Wow.
And this was just an enormous shock to me.
So that's awesome. And I'm sure you guys were just so excited about that. And that's a rare thing. And as you know, more than anybody, Scott, in archaeology, because I get this a lot too. I teach I've been teaching for 26 years on archaeology in the Old Testament. People think they sort of romanticize archaeology but the majority of it is washing pottery and dealing with ceramics is pretty much the whole thing. And you rarely ever find something, even with this, it's not monetarily very valuable. It's just a piece of lead, but it's what it actually implies.
Yeah, the lead, it's so typical in the late Bronze Age, because you think about the book of Job, maybe the oldest book in our canon, no mention of the Mosaic law in it. So we're going to put it way back there in that late Bronze Age period. Job 19:24. Oh, that my words were written on a lead tablet with an iron pen.
Wow.
Bam. Okay. There you get that very late Bronze Age concept of writing on lead with an iron pen. And incidentally, we found the pen also. We found the stylus.
That's incredible. What was it made out of? The lead?
The stylus?
Yes.
No, it was bronze.
Bronze. Wow.
Which is older than iron, you see.
So that was made, that was also found in the matrix as well, Scott. Is that correct? In the sifting?
Correct.
Wow. Has there been, and I guess now maybe we can get into some of the things. Before I get into some of the science questions, let me just say, and again, for the sake of those, and I kind of want to sort of play devil's advocate for a minute here. Who are some of the other guys on the team, and what are their backgrounds? So it's not just you, and you are admittedly, unapologetically, you are a Christian, you believe the Bible, but there are other people who have from various backgrounds and different theological backgrounds, different scientific backgrounds. So could you maybe give the viewers a rundown of who exactly was on the team?
Okay, I was the director of the project, and this isn't our full regular team, which has a lot more diversity. This was sort of just a crack, winter crew that I put together. But Abigail Levitt was my assistant director, and Abigail's doing a PhD at Ariel University right now in archaeology. She's actually working on a dig as we speak right now.
She's great.
I know. Suzanne Latimer was with us, one of our staff members, Kevin Larson. Steve Rudd built the provisional wet sifter for us. So because it wasn't our regular big sifting, we had to have something that was mobile. Frankie Snyder, who is Jewish, was the one who actually found the tablet, the Defixio, and she was very experienced in wet sifting, for over a decade at the Temple Mount Sifting Project on staff there. Mm-hmm. And then I had a number of my students who were there working with us as well. our photographer, Michael Ludini, who's
Yep.
been shooting in Israel since the Iron Age, as we like to say.
Poor Mike.
I know. And then, we were collaborating with other universities and faculty and, as needed. Our conservator, Orna Cohen, an Israeli, probably the top conservator in Israel. So, we had a very experienced team. And then all my volunteers are already trained in wet sifting. So, they knew what they were doing.
Right. So once you saw that this was a Defixio, did you bring some other people on to say, hey, listen, this is kind of beyond, did you have an x-ray, or was it, what was then the next steps that you guys took after you knew you may have had something?
Well, I knew we did have something. There's no doubt about it. You could see where it was folded. It was folded lead, and it's a known quantity. So we'd seen these before. Okay, so I took it to our lab in Jerusalem, and Orna and I in the lab tried very, very, very delicately under a microscope to see if there was any malleability to the metal. Could it be opened? Mm-hmm. And that's why when you look at the pictures that we released, which goes back to one of your questions earlier, like why the press conference now? One thing I forgot to say is that we had released that one photo of the outside only to later discover that there's text on the outside.
Oh, wow.
And that was another reason why we needed to sort of get out there and not have our work stolen from us,
Right.
But anyway, the corner of this broke off, a tiny corner. And so, of course, we stopped immediately and decided we're going to have to look for a lab, somebody that can scan through lead. But I didn't think you could do it. I mean, when you go to the doctor, they always put this lead thing on you if you're getting x-rays. Well, that doesn't do any good, apparently.
Yeah.
Now we know that we can scan through lead. All right. But here's the challenge was I thought I would be back in Israel in a few months. So we put everything away in storage. And then this thing called COVID-19 arrived. Yep. And I was locked out, for almost 2 years. So we could not advance the project. But in the meantime, I had found a lab with the help of Zwi Konisberg, had found a lab in Prague and was able to get into Israel on a journalist visa a few months ago, 5 months ago or something like that, and ultimately get the tablet to Prague. And then in 2 separate settings, it went through thousands of scans. And so we then were able to take those scans and begin to see each slice until ultimately we got into the sweet spot and we could see letters. And the first letter I saw was an aleph. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting because arur is the word for curse, What if the next letter is a resh? And then it was a resh. And, so it was a daily thing. We were just thinking, this is too good to be true, This is a curse on a curse tablet from Mt Ebal. But with the corner that did break off, just so everybody knows, we saved that tiny corner, and I was able to have the lead tested at Hebrew University with Professor Naama Yahalomak, who's a renowned archaeologist. She was able to test it and determine that the lead came from the Aegean, from a mine in Greece called Lavrion, which we know was in use in the late Bronze Age. So, wow, three ways that we date this. Okay, epigraphically, from the metallurgy that I just talked about, and then the archaeological context.
That's fantastic. Who were some of the language guys that you had to look at this with? Other paleographers in Europe?
Yeah, so I, of course, had to put a team together. And so I've had to get scientists who had the skill to do the data processing, the post-processing on these scans, okay? So that's a whole computer science, literally in and of itself. So I had to get someone with skill and who had published before. I wanted a track record. And then I needed epigraphers who were, trained epigraphers with background in early text. And so I chose Gershon Galil from Haifa University and Peter van der Veen from Johannes Gutenberg, the Mainz University in Germany. His PhD was in late Bronze Age epigraphic finds and his postdoc. They both, published extensively. And I didn't want someone who was like immediately part of my team. I wanted there to be some sort of autonomy, and I wanted 2 epigraphers to make sure that they both agree on a reading.
That's awesome.
Before we go public with it. And so that was the core of the team. I did talk to a couple of people early on. I noticed that one person who was criticizing me was Christopher Rolston, who's a renowned epigrapher.
Correct.
And I had reached out to Dr. Rolston, I don't know, 5-6 months ago, something like that. On 2 different occasions, I sent him emails inviting him to see the scans and to be a part of the collaboration. And so in his statement, I find it interesting that he says he can't have confidence in something when he hasn't seen the scans. Well, he had a chance. He should have responded to his emails.
I had no idea. Yeah, a friend of mine sent me his blog response to this, and I thought it was really interesting. His answer.
Yeah,
and he didn't.
Let your friend know that Dr. Rolston had the chance to.
He had the chance. Wow,
yeah.
That's interesting. So so this discovery is really amazing in many ways. And you guys made the announcement in the original press conference. I know you had. Did you have a couple of the paleographers on the Zoom call as well? Who did you have?
That's right. So Peter and Gershon were there with me. So
okay.
I just kind of laid out the project and did all the acknowledgments and thank yous, that, that one would need to do. I quoted John F. Kennedy at the beginning when Kennedy says that failure is an orphan, but success has many fathers.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there were many people to thank and to acknowledge, and I did that and kind of laid the groundwork. Then I asked for Peter and Gershon to share from their perspective where we were. Then we did Q&A alternating between live and virtual. And so altogether, maybe just under an hour at the press conference.
Right. And so Peter and the other, would you say the Israeli paleographer, what's his name?
Yeah.
Gershon
Galil.
Gershon Galil. They are in agreement on this. This is Paleo Hebrew. They're in agreement.
No. It's not Paleo Hebrew. It's
not
older than Paleo Hebrew.
Okay. Got it.
This is before Paleo Hebrew has even been thought about. Okay.
Wow.
This is the great grandfather of Paleo Hebrew.
Got it. So give us some dates. Give us some. That was actually the next question to ask you. Up to this point, now again, this is another thing we'll talk about in a second. But I want to talk about peer review. This whole idea about peer review and everything. But before we get to that, up to this point, before the discovery of the lead tablet, the curse tablet, what was the oldest Hebrew inscription found in Israel? Was it the Ketiv Hinnom scroll, or wasn't there an ostraca that was discovered that perhaps has something even older than the Ketiv Hinnom scroll?
Yes, most people would point to the Kayafa ostracon being about 1000 BC, approximately. That's sort of the widely accepted marker right now. So that would be already transitioning into what we would recognize as Paleo Hebrew. This is older than that. So
wow.
This is where you have hieroglyphic symbols that are morphing into phonetic characters.
It's awesome.
Okay? It is very awesome. So you're talking LB2, that's 1400 to 1200 is the range. And we're still grappling with where it falls in there, but and we may not even agree among ourselves. Some of us may think it's more toward the beginning of LB2 and some toward the end. But we all agree that it's an LB2 script. So at the very least, it's a couple of 100 years older than anything we know up to this time. And on the other end, it's up to as much as 400 years earlier.
Wow, that's just remarkable. And just so that people know, the significance of this cannot be overstated. Again, not to be like sensationalist. I know that's not what you're trying to be, Scott. You're just this is a remarkable discovery, and no matter who discovered it, this would have ripple effects around the world because of the implications of this. But as it stands today, my understanding of most archaeology that's done in Israel is that most working archaeologists, not all of them, but sort of a consensus that Israel, there really was no historical exodus, and that the conquest is sort of this, if it did happen, it was sort of a indigenous, the Canaanites rose up and began to identify themselves as Israelites. And, so there's no historical conquest, no exodus, and then Israel sort of rose up. But this sort of mitigates against that, in addition to other things like the discovery that you guys have made at El Makadar, and then also our understanding of Jericho, which I know is another thing. But has there been, here's the thing, I guess this now gets into the peer review thing. I had a number of people have sort of contacted me privately, texting, things like that. And he's like, well, peer review. And I'm like, well, I mean, I understand peer review is important, but here's the thing, you're never going to satisfy everyone, even if you're peer reviewed. I mean, my thing is that, yes, I want to be academically respectable. I think you do as well. And that's why you're not going to stake your reputation on making some kind of claim and then it being, cut down in the academic circles. But at the same time, I'm not willing to make peer review a litmus test for what I believe as a Christian. But I mean, think about this. I mean, I wonder if the resurrection is peer reviewed. I wonder if Jesus walking on water is peer reviewed. No one believes. There's no peer reviewed journals on that. But I'm not willing to jettison some of my beliefs. Now, it's not to say that that there's a place for reason, there's a place for evidence, and there is reason, there is evidence, and you guys this discovery is just amazing. So anything else you want to add on this? We'll see if we get some questions.
Well, yeah, let me just respond to peer review. I'm a big believer in it. I publish regularly in peer-reviewed journals. I have a 400-page volume coming out in a few months on Kermit Elmacotter that has gone through a rigorous peer-reviewed process. Number of articles that I've just written and that are also coming out. So nobody's a bigger believer in peer review than I am. So believe me, we will have an academic article that will be going through a peer review process, and then it'll be published. And then those who are some people have already made up their mind no matter what. And then wherever we publish it, some people will say, yeah, but that journal, it's an outlier, or, something like that. They'll have their whatevers, but I think fair-minded people are going to see that we went through a rigorous process that I've just explained to you. I have 2 epigraphers on the team itself, plus somebody who's very, very skilled with reading these tomographic scans. So, I mean, we have a built-in peer review. Then we will put it to a blind external peer review. So if everybody just hold their horses a little bit, give us a few months, we're writing this, but quite frankly, we found more letters than we anticipated. We've got more on the outside, and so it's going to take time. We've got to be careful and dot every I and cross every T. But hopefully, in a few months, it'll be out of our hands and in the hands of the peer reviewers, and then be published certainly, by the fall or by the end of the year.
That's awesome. And you may not be able to give this, but I wonder if you could. Is there any information exactly which journal you're going to be publishing in, or?
Well, I thought we had settled on one, but it's a highly rated journal, and it deals with scientific matters and archaeological matters. But now I'm grappling with this again, because do their peer reviewers have expertise in Levantine epigraphy? So we do we need to have a journal that has whoever the peer reviewers are, because it'll be blind to us. We won't know who they are. I just want to make sure that they're not on the record before it begins, that they're not on the record of being against it. And that number 2, that they have expertise in Levantine, Southern Levantine epigraphy from the late Bronze Age.
Fantastic. So since we're already there and we're sort of in the same sort of ball field as this subject, you mentioned the fact that this script found on the tablet is actually before Paleo Hebrew. This is proto. How would you describe it? Proto-Israelite?
Well, generically, the safest way to describe it is proto-alphabetic. Okay. Then we're not attaching ethnicity to it. We talk about proto-Canaanite or proto-Hebrew. I mean, typically this stuff has been described in the past as proto-Hebrew. I mean, a proto-Canaanite. I'm not willing to say that because, Ted, we've got the name Yahweh in it, and the Canaanites don't worship Yahweh. So let's call it like it is. If you want to be generic, call it proto-alphabetic. If you want to take a stand, then call it proto-Hebrew, because there's only one group of people worshiping Yahweh in that period of time, and those are the Israelites.
Now, I know that one of your colleagues and one of our mutual friends, Dr. Doug Petrovic, has written a book on the world's oldest alphabetic script. Does this discovery dovetail with that? Does it fit well within that?
Well, it certainly could. Most of the inscriptions he's dealing with coming from the Sinai, places like Serebel Hadim, southwestern Sinai, some of them that were found by Petrie and so forth, earlier in the 15th century. And Dr. Petrovic believes that these reflect that very transition that I'm talking about here, and he could be right. I mean, I think the jury's still out, and that did not go through peer review. So You know, but does this dovetail? It very well could. And also there's another ostracon that is out that he just wrote an article on in Bible and Spade called the Lachish Milk Bowl Ostracon. And spoiler alert here, that's a very similar script to what we're looking at. Okay.
Wow.
Now, Bible and Spade, again, is not a peer-reviewed journal. That's more of a popular journal. But to answer your question, this very well could strengthen some of the arguments that he has made.
Awesome. What is the date of the Lachish Ostracon? Is it about the same time frame as the lead tablet?
No. I mean, that's what Doug argues,
Okay.
that it's from around 1400 as well. So again, if we publish this, we'll want to take that through peer review also, and
Sure,
before we can be certain. But it's possible that these are contemporary.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So Scott, now I'm going to sort of a little bit put you on the spot. This will be an easy question though, but now you're an archaeologist, you're a trained archaeologist, and you do rigorous science. You're licensed with the Israel Antiquities Authority. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you do proper science. But the next question I'm going to ask you is really as a seminary professor, you know, provost, and also a former pastor as well. What does this discovery, what could this potential discovery mean for the average Christian who reads their Bible on Sunday, when they read about the story of Joshua in Joshua chapter 8, or the conquest, or anything like that? What are the potential implications of this discovery for the average Christian?
It's huge. I mean, do you have a reliable historical Bible? Now, for some of your listeners, that may not be an issue. They've never doubted that. They've never been exposed to other views, but others have. Mm-hmm. Last Sunday, I spoke at a church, and the pastor talked to me afterwards with tears in his eyes. He was a graduate of Princeton Seminary, Princeton. So he's no dummy, okay? And he trained in the documentary hypothesis all of his life. And when he talked to me, he looked at me in the eye and he said, "Are you telling me that Moses wrote the Pentateuch?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you telling me that there was the ability to write around 1400 BC? I said, "Yes." He said, "Today is the greatest day of my life. I've been in ministry for 25 years and without confidence in the text. I know I believe in God, but like these early, and I believe in Jesus in the New Testament, but like these early stuff, is it just mythology?" And by the way, Jesus said that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. So
yes,
for your Christian listeners, that's a good starting point right there. So the ramifications are enormous. That's one. The next day I got an email from a professor from Israel, who I will not use his name, but he said, "I just want to tell you that I'm a trained secularist, like Adam Zertal, but based on what you've announced and what I have followed the last 10 days, he said, I am rethinking everything I believe right now." Okay. Wow. So your question was, what are the ramifications of this? They're enormous, you know,
yes.
On a faith level. Now, I can bifurcate and move between those two worlds, but your question was about on a faith level, and it is huge.
That's awesome. Well, Scott, thank you. We got a few minutes left, and we have people that are actually with us now on the Zoom meeting, and also people through Facebook Live that are watching. And I'll open it up for the last couple of minutes here to see if anyone has any questions for Dr. Stripling on this really amazing, remarkable discovery. And Scott, once again, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be with us at Epic Archaeology to answer questions on this. And I know that you will be getting it out there once it is published here in the next few months, maybe toward the end of the year, into the summer or whatever. You'll let us know what that, where to get that and where to look at it and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Great to have you on. All right, let's see if there's any questions. You guys are sort of quiet out there. Maybe you're you're just absorbing it all in, but
yeah, they're just afraid about the curse. I never thought I would get so excited about a curse.
So while I'm kind of waiting for questions here, tell us exactly what is inscribed what are the words inscribed on the tablet?
Okay, so what we have on the inside of the tablet, 40 letters, and it's 23 words, and it says, "Cursed, cursed, cursed. Cursed are you by the God Yahweh." And then it's a chiastic parallelism. "Cursed you will surely die. You will surely die cursed. Cursed, cursed, cursed by Yahweh." So it has a literary structure to it. And in my view, it is probably a summary of the curses of Deuteronomy 27 and 28. And it is probably self-imprecatory, that like a titular head has invoked in a covenant legally binding way. We recognize that we are legally bound to this and that there are consequences if we violate them, unless we go to the altar. Okay, because remember, this is found on the altar. So even though I'm guilty, if I will repent and accept responsibility for my actions, I can have that curse removed from my life. The curse is for those who will not accept responsibility for their actions.
Wow. Are there any other, you mentioned earlier in our discussion, are there any are there any other Deficios that we know about that are of course more recent than the one that you discovered, and give it a little background on Deficios and what just generally what we know about them.
Yeah, I'll say a few words, and then I see that there's a couple of people that have typed in questions now. There are a lot of them from later time periods, and they're commonly found in wells, in graves, and I think they thought by going down into the underworld, you know, the netherworld, that they could be read by the gods, or they would become binding. And sometimes these are curses against my enemy. These are petitions or even self-imprecatory type curses. So there have been a lot of them, even at Caesarea Maritima, in a well there were a number of these that were found.
Wow. Okay, Chris and Hannah Johnson ask, does Dr. Stripling have much pushback or difficulty accessing the proposed altar location?
That's a good question. You know, it's in a sensitive area.
It is.
The line between area B and area C and really area A, they kind of all come together there. You know, you think American politics are dicey. You know, try Israeli politics in the West Bank, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always issues. You know, we had permission from the military, which is what is required to go there, and that's what we had when we went back and forth from the site. So there are ways to get there, but it's not as easy as going to shop for groceries at HEB or something like that.
One of the other questions from David is, how did you get permission for sifting the dump? A few questions of the legality of taking the artifacts.
Yeah, so this material, we have what's called the Oslo Accords that came into effect in 1993 that created Area A, Area B, Area C, these sort of modern divisions. This was grandfathered because Adam Zertal, the excavations ended in 1989 before the Oslo Accords. And so the license numbers that Zertal had from that material were still in effect. This is dumped material from the 1980s. It's not, if it was after 1993, that would be a different story. The people in charge there are the military and the Shomron Regional Council, and then the Palestinian Authority. And so, yes, you do have conflicting jurisdictional claims on the site. So this is why we were careful not to do archaeology. I called this from the beginning a research expedition, because we were just literally examining what had already been excavated many years ago.
Right. Another question from Carla, are the curses written in Deuteronomy in chiastic form? You know of?
That is a very good question. I did know the answer to that, Carla, but right now it's not coming to me, so I'll have to take another look at it. But look at the Psalms for if you want to see a lot of examples of you know, chiastic parallelisms. But I'll take another look at Deuteronomy 27. Good question.
Absolutely, that is a great question. There are actually quite a few you know, chiastic structures, polystrophes in the Pentateuch. I know one, definitely some in Genesis for sure. The whole flood narrative that sort of points to chapter, I think it's 8 verse 1, and God remembered Noah. So there's a lot going on there. But
yeah, all right. Think about Ted, if I may, just think about all the way back to the Garden of Eden. That's where the curses are first introduced.
Yes.
There's a curse on the ground, there's a curse on the serpent, a curse on the woman, and a curse on the man. So cursing is deeply tied into the biblical tradition. And Jesus, according to Christian theology, Jesus removes the curse when he dies on the cross.
Yes. One other question from Chris and Hannah, do you think there should be sifting or further excavation at Tel Balata?
Yes, Tel Balata is an extremely important site, excavated most recently by Drew University, I believe. But yes, it really needs further excavation and protection. There's houses now that are built on the outskirts of it. What I would do, you know, put Scott in charge of the world, give me Tel Balata, then we would take the backyards of all of those people. Those would become archaeological squares. And we would excavate their backyards, and then we would turn it back into, you know, cover it back up. You'd never know we were there, but there is a lot of important work that needs to happen there.
Right. And just for those who don't know, Tel Balata is the ancient site of Shechem. And it's got really roots going all the way back to the time of Jacob and before. And that's a whole nother discussion for another time. But Scott, I don't see any other questions right now. Oh, one other one. Mama Bear Apologetics. How long do they keep dumps from previous archaeological digs? Do you think your findings are going to increase people saving the dumps and going back to wet sift? Great question.
Great question, Mama Bear. They save them in perpetuity. Once they dump and put it there, it's going to be there. You know, it's a massive mound. If you go to the city of David, for instance, near the Gihon Spring, if you know where to look, you can kind of cut off the path and step up. And there's Kathleen Kenyon's dump piles from the 1960s from City of David excavations that are there, and they're massive. Imagine what all is in those dump piles. So they're there in perpetuity unless somebody moves them. Now, I think people cannot ignore, I mean, one of the ramifications of this fine is you just simply cannot ignore the potential for wet sifting. And yes, I do think more people will treat their dump piles differently. Like at Shiloh, you don't find an ABR dump pile. It doesn't exist. We do not have a dump pile.
Awesome.
Because when we finish with it, all that's left is gravel, and we use that to pave our roads around there. So I do think it's a new day coming, but it's going to be a gradual process.
That's fantastic. Well, Scott, I don't want to take any more of your time, but thank you so very much for taking your time to answer some questions about this remarkable curse tablet inscription. And perhaps we'll have to have you on again when the thing is published. And you know, I'm sure there's going to be a reaction, but you're right. Most of the reaction has been from people who sort of don't hold to a historical, you know, veracity of the Old Testament, or at least they're very skeptical. They have a different time frame. So, but time will tell. And how confident are you in this and how it's the science and the data that you've collected? Are you pretty confident that your processes are up and good to go?
Yeah, I'm totally confident, but let me repeat what I said at the press conference as we try to land this plane here. What I said at the press conference was, there will be different interpretations when this comes out. The text is not yet standardized at this point. It can be read vertically or horizontally, forward or backward. So there are different ways you can combine the letters. We've been grappling with it for months, okay, studying this text. And all I'm saying is, taking everything into account, the weight of evidence, this is what we think that it's saying. But no, don't be surprised if others don't read it differently. What they will not be able to argue is that it's not a late Bronze Age text on a curse tablet from Mt Ebal.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in today on today's live web. I keep saying podcast, but it's a live Facebook event for Epic Archaeology, and we're going to be putting this on YouTube. So you'll those of you who are watching this on YouTube, we recorded this live here in April of 2022. Hard to believe we're already into April now, but Scott, the best of wishes and Godspeed to you, brother. I know that next month you guys are getting ready to go to Shiloh to do some more digging.
Yep. Anyone who wants to join us, there's still time. Go to digshiloh.org.
And if people have questions, can they email you, or are you too busy to answer questions? Or
well, you know, I've probably answered, you know, everyone you can imagine in the interviews that I've done. So maybe try to search those interviews first. Yeah,
absolutely. Just Google Scott Stripling and the lead tablet curse, and you'll get tons of interviews that come up. But thank you again, Scott. God bless you, brother, and we'll talk to you later.
Take care,
guys.